Behind the whispers and legends of the Ottoman harem lies a world far more complex than most people could ever imagine. For centuries, Western fantasies painted these women as mere objects of pleasure, trapped in a world of sensual indulgence. But the truth, it couldn't be more different. Isa, a young historian specializing in Ottoman women's history, stumbled upon a collection of forgotten letters that would forever change our understanding of the imperial harem. What she discovered wasn't a tale of exploitation, but a sophisticated world where women wielded remarkable power, shaped empires, and created a female dynasty that ruled from behind the scenes for over 100 years. The very word harem comes from the Arabic harem, meaning forbidden or sacred, and referred to the private family quarters that were off limits to men outside the immediate family. Far from being a pleasure palace, the Ottoman imperial harem was essentially a complex political institution, a rigidly structured female administrative hierarchy that paralleled the male-dominated government. At its height during the 16th and 17th centuries, the imperial harem housed hundreds of women, including the sultan's mother, his consorts, female relatives, servants, and administrators. The women weren't prisoners but members of an intricate social system with its own rules, traditions, and power structures that would baffle most modern observers. For many women, especially those from humble backgrounds, entering the harem actually represented a path to education, wealth, and influence. That would have been impossible in the outside world. Contrary to popular belief, most women in the harem never even met the sultan, let alone shared his bed. Instead, they received extensive education in languages, literature, music, theology, and the complex etiquette required to navigate Ottoman court politics. Many became highly educated, multilingual individuals whose knowledge and skills far exceeded what was available to most women and even men of their era. The imperial harem was ruled with absolute authority by the valid sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan. She controlled the entire female hierarchy, managed the harem's substantial budget, and often wielded significant influence over imperial politics. Perhaps the most powerful was Qasim Sultan, who effectively ruled the Ottoman Empire for much of the first half of the 17th century. Born as Anastasia, a Greek Christian girl from the island of Tinos, she was captured by Ottoman raiders and brought to Constantinople as a slave. Through her intelligence and political acumen, she rose to become the favorite consort of Sultan Ahmed I, but Qasim's real power emerged after her son, Murad IV, became sultan when he was just 11 years old. As valid sultan, she served as regent, making crucial decisions about war, diplomacy, and domestic policy. Even when her son came of age, Qasim maintained enormous influence, acting as a key advisor on matters of state. Her power was so great that when Murad died, she continued her reign through another son, Ibrahim, and later through her grandson, Mehmed IV. For nearly 30 years, this former slave girl was arguably the most powerful person in an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Qasim's rise wasn't unique in Ottoman history. The period from the mid-16th to the mid-17th century is known as the Sultanate of Women, when a succession of powerful valid sultans effectively governed one of the world's greatest empires. These women controlled appointments, directed policy, negotiated with foreign powers, and sometimes even determined which prince would succeed to the throne. Their power stemmed from a unique aspect of Ottoman succession. Unlike European monarchies, with their clear rules of primogeniture, any son of a sultan could potentially succeed him. This created fierce competition among the mothers of princes, who knew their own fate and status depended entirely on their son becoming sultan. When Isa discovered detailed accounts of these women's political maneuvers in the archives, she was stunned by their sophistication. These weren't passive concubines, she noted in her research journal. They were political masterminds playing a high-stakes game for empire. What emerged from the dusty letters and administrative records was a picture of female power that defied all the stereotypes. Roxolana, born as Alexandra Lisowska in what is now Ukraine, perhaps best exemplifies the extraordinary journeys possible within the harem system. Captured by Crimean Tatars and eventually gifted to the future Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, she broke all precedents in Ottoman history. Suleiman became so devoted to her that he freed her from slave status and, most shockingly, legally married her, the first Ottoman sultan in centuries to take a formal wife rather than just concubines. Roxolana, known as Hurrem Sultan in Ottoman sources, wasn't merely beloved. She became Suleiman's closest political advisor. The couple exchanged hundreds of letters when the sultan was away on military campaigns, with Roxolana providing crucial information about court politics and offering strategic advice. She established massive charitable foundations, building mosques, schools, hospitals, and public kitchens throughout the empire. Her diplomatic correspondence with European rulers, including letters to the King of Poland and the Queen of France, reveals her direct involvement in international politics. For a former slave girl to rise to such heights of power and formal recognition was unprecedented, shattering the conventional understanding of what was possible for women in the 16th century Muslim world. The harem's physical space itself reflected its true purpose as a center of female administration rather than pleasure. Located in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, the imperial harem consisted of over 400 rooms, arranged around courtyards and connecting corridors, a veritable city within a city. The quarters were organized hierarchically, with the Valid Sultan occupying the largest and most lavishly decorated apartments, followed by the favorite consorts, other women of the Sultan, and finally, female servants and officials. The architecture emphasized privacy and security, with multiple gates and corridors controlled by both female guardians and eunuchs, who served as intermediaries between the male and female worlds of the palace. Far from the sensual paradise depicted in Orientalist paintings, historical records reveal a highly regulated environment governed by strict protocol. The harem's daily routine centered around education, religious observance, and administrative duties. When Isa first visited the harem quarters in Topkapi Palace as part of her research, she was struck by how functional the space was. It feels more like a government ministry than a pleasure palace, she wrote in her notes. The reality of harem life was disciplined, structured, and deeply political. Education was central to life in the imperial harem, with young women receiving instruction that rivaled or exceeded what was available in the finest institutions of the time. Girls learned reading, writing, mathematics, theology, music, poetry, and multiple languages, including Ottoman, Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. Those showing particular aptitude might study calligraphy, literature, or even political theory. Physical education, including horseback riding, was also part of the curriculum for some. This educational system produced remarkably accomplished women who wrote poetry, composed music, and created artwork that has survived to this day. Recent scholarship has identified dozens of female poets from the Ottoman court, whose work demonstrates sophisticated literary technique and deep philosophical insight. Mihrimah Sulta, daughter of Suleiman and Rox, was known for her intelligence and education. Becoming a patron of architecture who commissioned important mosques and public works, the letters Isa discovered revealed conversations between harem women discussing poetry, debating religious interpretation, and analyzing political texts, hardly the activities Western fantasies attributed to them. For many girls from provincial backgrounds, the harem provided educational opportunities they could never have accessed otherwise. The economic power wielded by elite harem women was staggering. The Valid Sultan and senior concubines controlled enormous personal fortunes and managed extensive charitable foundations known as vakifs. These foundations built and maintained mosques, schools, hospitals, bridges, fountains, and soup kitchens throughout the empire. Nurbana Sultan, mother of Sultan Murad III, commissioned the massive Atiktavalid complex in Istanbul, which included a mosque, madrasa, religious school, hospital, public kitchen, caravanserai for travelers, and a primary school. These foundations weren't just charitable endeavors, but economic powerhouses that owned revenue-generating properties and employed hundreds of people. Through these institutions, harem women shaped the urban landscape of the Ottoman Empire and wielded significant economic influence. When Isa analyzed the financial records of these foundations, she was astonished by their scale. The Valid Sultans were managing budgets equivalent to those of small European kingdoms, she noted. They were among the most significant economic actors in the empire. This economic power gave them tremendous political leverage and ensured their legacy would endure in stone and mortar across Ottoman lands. Contrary to popular imagination, entering the imperial harem wasn't always involuntary. While many women were indeed captives or gifts from provincial governors, others were voluntarily sent by ambitious families who recognized the opportunities for advancement. For girls from modest backgrounds in Anatolia, the Balkans, or the Caucasus, the imperial harem offered education, security, and potential paths to wealth and influence unavailable elsewhere. Once inside the harem, a strict hierarchical system governed advancement. New arrivals started as novices asimi and received years of training before potentially advancing. Only a tiny percentage would ever become consorts Haseki to the Sultan, but many found respectable positions within the harem, administration, or advantageous marriages to Ottoman officials after serving their time. The most capable and fortunate might become the superintendent of the harem Kathudakad and treasurer, Hasnadar, Usta, or hold other important administrative positions. For many families throughout the empire, having a daughter accepted into the imperial harem was considered a tremendous honor and opportunity rather than a tragedy. When Isa tracked the life trajectories of dozens of harem women through Ottoman archives, she found that many achieved significant social mobility, with former slaves becoming wealthy, respected figures with their own households and political connections. The relationship between mothers and sons formed the backbone of power in the Ottoman system. When a prince became sultan, his mother immediately became the Valid Sultan, the highest-ranking woman in the empire. This created a unique dynamic where mothers were intensely invested in their sons' success and often acted as their closest advisors and protectors. The Valid Sultan's apartment connected directly to the Sultan's quarters, ensuring regular private access that even Grand Viziers might envy. This mother-son alliance was often the most stable political relationship in the volatile Ottoman court, where other alliances shifted constantly. Kösem Sultan defended her son's throne against multiple threats, skillfully eliminating rivals and building essential political coalitions. When her son Sultan Ibrahim began showing signs of mental instability that threatened the empire, she initially worked to cover for his erratic behavior. However, when his rule became truly dangerous, she reluctantly participated in the coalition that deposed him in favor of her young grandson. This decision illustrates the complex balance these women maintained between maternal devotion and responsibility to the empire. When Isa analyzed the correspondence between sultans and their mothers, she found evidence of deep emotional bonds coupled with sophisticated political partnership. These weren't just maternal relationships, she wrote, they were the most important political alliances in the empire. The harem's internal politics were extraordinarily complex, with constantly shifting alliances and rivalries. Competition among concubines who had borne sons to the sultan could be fierce, as each woman knew her future status depended entirely on her son becoming the next sultan. This created a system where maternal ambition became a powerful political force. Yet, alongside this competition, the archives reveal surprising examples of cooperation and solidarity among harem women. Letters discovered by Isa show networks of mutual support, with senior women mentoring younger ones and forming alliances to achieve common goals. The Valid Sultan often acted as mediator in these conflicts, working to maintain harmony within the harem while advancing her own interests. Sefi Sultan, mother of Sultan Mehmed III, maintained power for decades by building a network of loyal allies throughout the harem hierarchy. She placed women from her faction in key administrative positions and arranged advantageous marriages for others to create connections with powerful men in the outside government. Her careful balancing of rewards and discipline maintained her authority through periods of intense political turbulence. The political acumen displayed in these internal negotiations rivals that of any diplomatic court in history. The position of Valid Sultan came with enormous ceremonial importance that reinforced the legitimacy of her son's rule. When a new sultan took the throne, his mother would be escorted to the imperial harem in an elaborate procession called the Valid Ala'i. Moving from the old palace to Topkapi, she would be accompanied by hundreds of attendants, with the streets lined with cheering crowds. This public spectacle emphasized her new status as the second most powerful person in the empire. The Valid Sultan had her own council, divan, received foreign ambassadors, and issued orders in her own name. She wore distinctive regalia that signified her unique position, including elaborate headpieces that resembled small crowns. Ottoman miniature paintings show Valid Sultans, depicted with visual symbols of authority nearly equal to those of the Sultan himself. During religious festivals and court ceremonies, the Valid Sultan occupied a position of honor, sometimes watching proceedings from behind a screened window that allowed her to observe while maintaining the seclusion appropriate to her status. When European ambassadors described these ceremonies in their dispatches home, they often expressed astonishment at the obvious power these women wielded. The Sultan's mother must be considered almost a co-ruler, wrote one Venetian ambassador, for nothing of importance happens without her knowledge and consent. The harem was protected by a unique class of servants, eunuchs who had undergone castration. Before puberty, two separate groups served different functions. White eunuchs, typically from the Balkans or Caucasus, initially guarded the outer sections, while black eunuchs, primarily from Africa, guarded the inner harem where the women lived. Over time, the chief black eunuch Kisler Akask became one of the most powerful figures in the Ottoman court, controlling access to the Sultan and managing the enormous endowments belonging to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Far from being mere guards, top eunuchs were sophisticated political operators who formed strategic alliances with harem women. Together, they could make or break the careers of officials in the male government hierarchy. Some chief eunuchs accumulated enormous personal wealth and power, building palaces and founding charitable institutions of their own. The relationship between senior harem women and the chief eunuchs was particularly significant, as they often worked together to influence imperial politics. When Isa examined the correspondence between Kösem Sultan and the chief black eunuch of her era, she found evidence of a close political partnership, coordinating their actions to control court appointments and policy decisions. These weren't just servant-mistress relationships, Isa noted, but sophisticated political alliances between power brokers who each brought different strengths to the table. The end of the Sultanate of Women came dramatically with the murder of Kösem Sultan in 1651. After decades as the empire's most powerful figure, serving as regent for two sons and a grandson, she became embroiled in a power struggle with her daughter-in-law, Turhan Sultan. As the mother of the young Sultan Mehmed IV, Turhan had a legitimate claim to the position of Valid Sultan, but Kösem, the boy's grandmother, was reluctant to surrender power. Contemporary accounts suggest Kaksim may have been planning to depose Mehdi in favor of another prince whom she could more easily control. Learning of this plot, Turhan struck first. One night, assassins entered Kaksim's apartments and strangled her with a curtain cord. The murder shocked the empire and marked a turning point in Ottoman history, while Turhan Sultan would herself become a powerful valid sultan, rebuilding the Ottoman navy and commissioning major architectural works. The era of nearly absolute female rule was ending. The empire was entering a new phase, with different power dynamics and challenges. When Isa read the court chronicler's account of Kaksim's death, she was struck by how matter-of-factly he described the murder of the woman who had dominated Ottoman politics for 3 decades. The chronicler wrote about her death as he would about the fall of a grand vizier, Isa noted, a testament to how completely these women were recognized as political figures rather than mere harem occupants. The architectural legacy of these powerful women still dominates the skyline of modern Istanbul. The massive mosque complexes commissioned by valid sultans stand as monuments to their wealth, power, and piety. Turhan Sultan's Yeni Valid Mosque in Eminönü remains one of Istanbul's most recognizable landmarks. Photographs don't do justice to the scale of these buildings. Walking into the courtyard of Kosum Sultan's Sinali Mosque with its intricate blue Iznik tiles, Isa felt physically overwhelmed by this concrete expression of female power. These weren't modest women's projects but statements of imperial authority and legitimacy that rivaled anything built by male rulers. Beyond the capital, harem women's building projects transformed cities across the empire. In Cairo, Damascus, Mecca, and dozens of other cities, their mosques, schools, and public kitchens served a population for centuries. The scale of this architectural patronage reveals not just their wealth but their conception of themselves as imperial rulers with responsibility for public welfare and religious patronage. Studying the founding documents of these institutions, Isa discovered that many explicitly stated their purpose as ensuring the patron's name would be remembered, and prayers said for her soul in perpetuity. These women were thinking about their historical legacy. Isa realized they saw themselves as figures whose actions would be judged by history. The harem system began to decline in the 18th and 19th centuries as the Ottoman Empire itself weakened and modernized. The Topkapi Palace was gradually abandoned in favor of newer European-style palaces along the Bosphorus. These new palaces reflected changing sensibilities, with harem quarters that were less institutional and more closely resembling large family homes. As Ottoman rulers increasingly adopted European customs, the traditional harem hierarchy lost some of its political significance. By the final years of the empire, in the early 20th century, the harem had become primarily a private family space rather than a center of political power. When the Ottoman Empire fell after World War I and Mustafa Kemal Ataturk established the Turkish Republic in 1923, the caliphate was abolished, and with it, the imperial harem officially ended. The last members of the Ottoman dynasty, including the women of the imperial harem, were sent into exile. Some former harem women adapted successfully to their changed circumstances, using their education and social skills to build new lives in Europe, the Middle East, or the United States. Others, raised entirely within the secluded palace system, struggled to adjust to a world for which they had never been prepared. Isa tracked down interviews with some of the last surviving harem women from the 1980s, who expressed both nostalgia for the structured world they had lost and appreciation for the freedoms of modern life. Despite their enormous historical influence, the women of the Ottoman imperial harem nearly vanished from historical record. Western historians, relying on sensationalized accounts from European travelers who never actually entered the harem, perpetuated stereotypes of Oriental sensuality that bore little resemblance to reality. Ottoman historical chronicles, written by male court historians, often deliberately minimized female influence to maintain the fiction of exclusive male rule. Only in recent decades have historians like Isa begun piecing together the true story. From administrative records, court chronicles, architectural patronage, endowment deeds, and the occasional surviving letters or memoirs, this historical recovery reveals women who were not victims but sophisticated political actors working within the constraints of their time. The pleasure palace of Western imagination dissolves before the reality of an administrative center, where women wielded power through carefully constructed networks of influence and alliance. What Isa found most remarkable was how completely the historical record had been distorted. These weren't marginalized figures, she wrote, but central actors in one of history's greatest empires. Their erasure says more about our historical biases than about Ottoman reality. The stories of these women challenge our modern assumptions about historical female agency and power. In an era when European women had few legal rights and little access to formal education, the elite women of the Ottoman harem could amass personal fortunes, commission major architectural works, influence international politics, and sometimes, effectively, rule an empire. This doesn't mean the system wasn't restrictive in many ways. Harem women lived within strict constraints of seclusion and court protocol, but within those constraints, they developed sophisticated methods of exercising power that deserve serious historical attention. As Issa dug deeper into the archives, she began to see parallels with other historical contexts where women exercised soft power through influence, patronage, and behind-the-scenes negotiation when formal authority was denied them. The Ottoman harem wasn't an aberration, but perhaps an unusually successful example of how women, throughout history, have found ways to claim power in systems designed to exclude them. What made the Ottoman case exceptional was the formal recognition of the valid Sultan's authority and the institutionalization of female power within the imperial system. For contemporary women studying this history, it offers a more complex understanding of female agency in historical contexts often dismissed as simply oppressive. The concept of the harem has been so thoroughly misrepresented in Western culture that the word itself has become almost impossible to rescue. From Orientalist paintings showing lounging odalisques to Hollywood harems filled with dancing girls, popular culture has consistently portrayed these women as passive objects of male fantasy. This distortion served specific political and cultural purposes during European colonialism, justifying Western intervention by depicting Eastern societies as backward and oppressive toward women. The reality of powerful, educated harem women who shaped imperial politics didn't fit this narrative and was therefore systematically erased. Issa found that even many of her academic colleagues were initially skeptical of her research findings. There's a kind of resistance to this history, she noted, because it doesn't fit our established narrative about gender in Islamic societies. Yet the documentary evidence is overwhelming for those willing to look beyond the stereotypes. Administrative records, architectural patronage, diplomatic correspondence, and court chronicles all testify to the significant role these women played. Perhaps most telling are the reactions of contemporary European observers who actually had diplomatic contact with the Ottoman court. "The empire is ruled by women," complained one frustrated 17th-century ambassador who found his diplomatic efforts blocked by the valid sultan's opposition. The women of the Ottoman harem came from astonishingly diverse backgrounds: Greeks, Ukrainians, Russians, Georgians, Circassians, Ethiopians, and dozens of other ethnicities were represented within its walls. This diversity reflected the vast geographic reach of the Ottoman Empire and its complex relationships with neighboring powers. Far from the homogeneous group depicted in Orientalist fantasies, these women brought different languages, cultural traditions, and religious backgrounds to the imperial court. Some, like Roxolana, were captured in raids or warfare. Others were gifts from vassal states or allied powers. Still others came through the slave markets that operated throughout the Mediterranean world. This diversity created a cosmopolitan atmosphere within the harem, where multiple languages were spoken and various cultural traditions maintained alongside Ottoman court culture. The most successful women were those who could navigate this multicultural environment while mastering Ottoman customs and politics. Issa found evidence that some valid sultans maintained connections to their birth cultures, corresponding with rulers from their homelands or showing special favor to people from their native regions. Nurbanu Sultan, born Rachel Olivia Danesi, to a Venetian Jewish family, maintained covert diplomatic contacts with Venice throughout her time as valid sultan. This complex web of cultural and political connections gave the Ottoman court a distinctly international character. Modern feminist scholarship has struggled to characterize the Ottoman harem within existing frameworks of women's history. Was it an oppressive institution that limited women's freedom, or a unique power center that offered certain women extraordinary opportunities unavailable elsewhere? The answer, Issa concluded after years of research, is that it was both simultaneously. The harem system certainly restricted women's physical freedom and sexual autonomy. Yet within those constraints, it also created space for female education, administration, wealth accumulation, and political influence that few contemporary women in any society could access. This paradox makes the harem difficult to categorize, but more important to understand as a complex historical reality. As Issa presented her findings at academic conferences, she encountered both resistance and fascination. Some colleagues accused her of romanticizing what they saw as an inherently exploitative system. Others were captivated by this alternative model of female power that didn't fit neatly into Western historical narratives. What became increasingly clear was that understanding the Ottoman harem required abandoning simplistic judgments and engaging with the full complexity of these women's lives. They weren't passive victims awaiting liberation by modern sensibilities, but historical actors making strategic choices within the constraints of their time and place. The most compelling stories from the Ottoman harem are those of dramatic reversals of fortune, slave girls who rose to rule empires, powerful, valid sultans who fell from grace, and women who survived palace revolutions to emerge stronger than before. Kösem Sultan navigated the treacherous waters of Ottoman politics for over 40 years, surviving multiple palace coups and changes of regime before her eventual assassination. Sefi Sultan maintained her position through the tumultuous reign of 3 sultans before being exiled to the old palace when her influence finally waned. These dramatic narratives rival anything in fiction, with stakes literally as high as imperial thrones. When Issa began compiling these biographies, she was struck by the resilience these women displayed. They were operating in a political environment where failure could mean exile or death, she noted, yet they maneuvered with remarkable skill through decades of crisis. What emerged from her research was a picture of women who were neither helpless victims nor all-powerful manipulators, but shrewd political operators working within a dangerous and constrained system. They built alliances, neutralized enemies, placed loyal supporters in key positions, and carefully timed their political moves. Those who succeeded left legacies that shaped the empire for generations. Those who failed often paid with their freedom or their lives. The letters Isa discovered in the archives revealed something unexpected: genuine emotional bonds within the competitive harem environment. Despite the potential for rivalry, many women formed close friendships, mentor relationships, and even surrogate family connections. Senior women often took younger ones under their protection, teaching them to navigate court politics and helping advance their careers. Mothers separated from their children wrote poignant letters expressing their longing and concern. Issa was particularly moved by a collection of correspondence between a former harem woman who had been married to a provincial governor and her friends still in the imperial harem. Their letters discussed everything from court gossip to personal health concerns to shared memories, revealing a supportive female community that transcended physical separation. Other documents showed women advocating for each other in matters of advancement or protection. The valid sultan might intervene to secure a better position for a favorite's daughter or sister. Even in cases where women were political rivals, they sometimes maintained cordial personal relationships, understanding that alliances could shift quickly in the volatile court environment. These personal connections humanized the harem women, showing that even within this highly structured political system, authentic human relationships flourished. The most intimate and least understood aspect of harem life remains the relationship between the sultan and his consorts. Historical records are predictably silent on these private matters, leaving much to speculation. What is clear is that the popular image of a sultan with hundreds of sexual partners bears little resemblance to historical reality. Most Ottoman sultans had relationships with only a small number of women who held the formal position of consort haseki. The majority of women in the harem never had any intimate contact with the sultan at all. For those selected as consorts, the relationship could range from brief to lifelong, with some women maintaining their position for decades. These weren't simply sexual relationships but complex personal and political partnerships. Roxolana's letters to Suleiman reveal genuine affection and intellectual engagement alongside political discussion. Other consorts used their influence to advocate for family members, advance political allies, or promote certain policies. The most successful understood that their position depended not just on physical attraction but on becoming valuable companions and advisors to the sultan. Issa noted that the European fascination with the sexual aspects of harem life revealed more about Western preoccupations than Ottoman realities. The historical record shows us women who were political actors first and foremost, she wrote. Their intimate relationships with the sultan were just one aspect of their complex roles within the imperial system. The legacy of the Ottoman harem extends far beyond its historical moment, influencing everything from international politics to art and literature. The diplomatic skills of women like Nurbanu Sultan helped shape Ottoman relations with European powers for decades. The architectural patronage of the valid sultans transformed urban landscapes throughout the empire, with their buildings still serving communities today. Perhaps most significant is the challenge these women's stories pose to simplistic narratives about gender and power in Islamic history. The Ottoman harem reveals a model of female political influence that operated differently from Western paradigms, but was no less real in its effects. As modern scholars continue recovering this history, it offers new perspectives on how women have exercised power across cultural contexts. For Issa, the most important legacy is the complex humanity of these women that emerges from the historical record. They weren't symbols or stereotypes, she concluded in her book on the subject, but real people navigating an intricate social and political system with the tools available to them. Their stories deserve to be understood, not through the lens of Orientalist fantasy or modern political agendas, but on their own terms as historical actors who shaped one of history's most powerful empires from behind its forbidden doors. The hidden stories of the Ottoman imperial harem challenge us to reconsider what we think we know about history, power, and gender across cultures. These women, from slave girls who rose to rule empires to princesses who built architectural masterpieces, deserve to be remembered not as exotic curiosities but as significant historical figures who shaped their world. Their complex legacy offers no simple lessons about female empowerment or oppression, but something more valuable, a reminder that human beings in every time and place find ways to exercise agency, build meaningful relationships, and leave their mark on history, even within systems designed to limit their freedom. As Issa completed her research and prepared to share these women's stories with the world, she felt a profound connection to these figures from the past. They had been nearly erased from historical memory, their actual lives replaced by fantasies that served others' purposes. By recovering their true stories, she was restoring something precious, not just historical accuracy, but the complex humanity of women who refused to be passive objects in their own lives. The real women of the Ottoman harem, she wrote in the conclusion to her book, were neither the oppressed victims nor the sensual odalisques of Western imagination, but something far more interesting, ambitious, educated, strategic actors who carved out unprecedented spheres of female power within the constraints of their time.